here a question. Why do I choose to react when I know better, in quotation marks? Is being exhausted an excuse for making a shameful choice? Do I actually want to react and be bad? So why do I choose to react when I know better? Is being exhausted an excuse for making a shameful choice? Do I actually want to react and be bad? That's an interesting... people who are in the process of awakening, as I mentioned before, often experience periods when they are very unawakened again. They revert back into reactivity and ego consciousness, and then they are back in a more awakened state. And when they get into more awakened state, they look back on something that perhaps they did the other day, or yesterday, or this morning, and say, how could I have been so, why was I suddenly so, whatever, I don't know what the questioner refers to, why was I so reactive to that person? Why was I so angry? Why did I do that? Why, how could I have done that? And then it happens repeatedly, and then he's asking, how is it that, why do I choose to react when I know better? No, the answer, of course, is you don't choose to react, and you know better only afterwards. So in the moment, you have no choice, because you are run by the conditioned mind, the mental-emotional field with its conditioned patterns. And to be run by the conditioned mind means to be trapped in ego. So it's the ego in you that does it. You have no choice. The choice only comes in when you're aware. So the choice would be there if you noticed, let's say in a conversation or an interaction with somebody, and you can suddenly feel the impulse to react and to say something or whatever it is. And at that moment, if you could know it for what it is, then awareness is there. And at that moment, you could choose either to say what you wanted to say, what the impulse wanted you to say, or you can let it go, not suppress it, let it go, because you realize it as, to use a Buddhist term, unskillful. Buddhists like the term unskillful living. Basically that means, I call it unconscious, and Buddhists call it unskillful action. And so you recognize it as unskillful and you let it go. But until that happens, when the awareness is there while the impulse, as the impulse is about to take you over, the awareness is there. What tends to happen is the awareness comes in afterwards, but the time interval between having to act something out and realizing that this is what you did, the time interval gets shorter. So at first you may act something out, and 2 days later you think, oh. And then you act something out, and 1 day later you act something out, and an hour later you say, oh, the awareness comes. And then you act something out, and a minute after you did it, you know it, oh, I did it again. Sometimes, of course, you find people apologize to others. They say, I'm so sorry I said that. At that time, they were not sorry, because something else was in them that did it. Almost a sub-personality, and the ego was there, did it. And the ego most egos have different sub-personalities. They're all egoic aspects of the ego. So you have one sub-personality that in certain circumstances acts like a little child, oh. And then another one, when it gets triggered by something like money, suddenly gets extremely angry and fearful. You took that money away from you, did you? So that you've got the money sub-personality, and you have a little girl personality, no, and many others probably. So you have this multiplicity of people inside you, and others who happen to just meet one of them at a particular time. And you never know which one is going to come up on any given day or in any given circumstance. I had close observation with people when I lived for a while in a commune in England many years ago, with a shared house with a bit of land. And I could so clearly observe with many people living there how many of them were different people on different days, completely different. And I was often sitting at breakfast downstairs and I could hear steps coming down. I wonder who is coming down now. It could be the same human being, but a different incarnation of that same person. A very cheerful person. What a wonderful morning. Great, isn't it? Great to be alive. We should be grateful to God for being here in this wonderful... And the next day, don't talk to me. Leave me alone. Don't want to know. Same person. But in all cases, unconscious. Taken over by certain patterns. Now, when there's awareness, then the different sub-personalities, which are aspects of the ego, are contained, so you don't lose yourself in one or the other. They are more contained, and gradually they dissipate. So you're no longer many different people. And then as you grow more conscious, you find yourself, you're basically the same in every circumstance. And you don't act out roles anymore, which is, you're the same whether you meet the Pope or the Dalai Lama, or you meet a person sweeping the street. Is exactly the same, because you don't have a mental image of who you're meeting, and you don't operate through mental images anymore. You're meeting a human being. You're meeting the being. It's the same. So when it happens, you don't have a choice, so you don't choose. The questioner asked, why do I choose to react? You don't choose. It happens to you. Now, the next part of the question is being exhausted for making is being exhausted an excuse for making a shameful choice? It is true that when people who are beginning to awaken often find that when they have low energy, their consciousness is also low. So they're tired, or they had a long day and exhausted, and then they just can't be present anymore. I don't have the energy to be present. Don't talk to me about presence. Don't want to know. Just what is all that rubbish, presence? So you get they're exhausted, and again, a time comes when they begin to realize that, and then even when they're exhausted, they can still know that they're exhausted without being identified, without it making them unconscious. And the last part of the question is, do I actually want to react and be bad? No, you don't want to react and be bad, but the ego wants to react. And being bad is not bad either to the ego. Trouble is good. To have an argument with somebody is great. To try to prove somebody's wrong is great. The ego loves that. It needs to be right. It needs an enemy somewhere. Please give me an enemy. Because if I don't have an enemy, I don't know who I am anymore. I define myself through the other. And so I need to emphasize the otherness of the other, because otherwise I don't know who I am anymore. Individual people do it. Entire countries do it. So they point to another country as those are the bad guys over there. The mainstream media, they participate. They habitually create an image of another country as bad, And it's ego, it's collective ego. They don't know what they do. So the question is not then, it's not do I actually want to react and be bad? No, you don't. You're not even there when it happens. It's happening to you or inside you, and you can't know anything about it. You're asleep at that moment. Spiritually speaking, you're asleep. In other words, unconscious at that moment. The moment you become conscious again, you look back and say, oh, I did it again. Well, you didn't. It happened to you. But you have to suffer the consequences. Now, some people, when this happens, people who are very unconscious and have violent tendency, very unconscious, they can even perpetrate acts of violence in moments of deep unconsciousness when they overcome. Now, they may not even be really aware at any time, but they can function normally for some of the time. And then, in other words, I call that normal unconsciousness. You can function, be a part of society. Yes, in conflict with others. Yes, but nevertheless, in normal unconsciousness, you can be part of society and function like millions of others. Normal unconsciousness, and then periodically they from normal unconsciousness they go down to deep unconsciousness, and such deep unconsciousness they can perpetrate acts of violence. Sometimes it happens through alcohol. Many crimes are committed because people get completely drunk and then they get a gun and then they shoot somebody. Just an argument is enough, and something dreadful happens. And so one could say, on the one hand, you could say, well, is this person who is now going to prison for the rest of his life, is he responsible? If he was completely unconscious when he did that, it just happened to him, and he did it, is he responsible? Should he go to, if he's not responsible, as I seem to imply, because it's unconscious, then naturally you would have to say, well, then he shouldn't go to prison, should he? Well, then the reason you should give why he should go to prison is to protect others, because it probably will happen again. That's one reason why he should go to prison, and I would agree with that. There's another reason, and that is, even though people may not be responsible for their unconsciousness, they still have to suffer the consequences of their unconsciousness. And this is how evolution happens. Many humans, they don't necessarily go to prison. There are other consequences for unconsciousness. So even if you're not responsible, because it is the destiny of humans to become more conscious, to grow in consciousness. And for very unconscious humans, the way they become more conscious is to suffer the consequences of their unconsciousness. And by suffering the consequences of their unconsciousness, they become more conscious. In other words, some people become more conscious after 20 or 30 years in prison, or just a few years, and suddenly the personality subsides and something else arises, and they go, wow. And they can't. Who did that? And they just can't. And so it sounds a little paradoxical, but this is how evolution happens. For very unconscious humans, they do bad things. Sometimes the consequence is their own premature death, because if you kill a few people, one day somebody kills you, or they get maimed, or whatever it is, you suffer the consequences of your unconsciousness, and through that extreme suffering, there's an opportunity of awakening. So quite a few very unconscious humans awaken in that way. So you could say the ego, their very unconscious ego, ultimately becomes an instrument for their awakening, which is the ego's own death. My final answer to the questioner then is, it may be that there are certain situations that you go into in your daily life that you know are more likely to trigger your unconscious reactivity. In other words, make you unconscious. It could be a person that you go visit, and this person always makes you unconscious. It could be, and that could be somebody you work with, or it could be somebody you've known for a very long time as part in your family. Whoever it may be, maybe your parents. Whenever you visit your parents, the same script is being played out. Your mother or father accuses you of not being good enough or whatever they do, and you react, and you storm out and you shout. This is one of many possible scenarios. Or you, before having contact with your ex-spouse, for some reason you still need to be in contact, to know that you're going to be triggered, and then instead of just going into the situation, use it as a spiritual practice to see if you can stay present while you talk to them. And you have to really feel your entire body when you talk to your ex-wife or ex-husband, and you have to go, okay. Don't tell them, I'm just practicing being present. That doesn't work. Just be present as much as you can. So that's your opportunity. And that's, of course, people with whom you share a lot of history are often like that. You need to, they trigger you. And so before you interact with them, know, okay, I'll stay present now. So and then you go into this high degree of alertness when you talk to them, so that you are not forced to act out the same script again, the same reactivity again and again and again. So as somebody said, Ram Dass said, famous advice, if you're so enlightened, go and spend 2 weeks with your parents. If you think you're so enlightened, go visit your parents for 2 weeks. Well, that'll give you good feedback of where you're at. And it is often the case that other humans give you feedback as to your state of consciousness. Because it's easy to fool yourself when you're alone in a room or out in nature, and you say, I'm completely enlightened now. Nothing is bothering me. Wonderful. And then the next thing happens. You meet somebody. What? How dare you say? How dare you? There's a lot of, there's an interesting division. That's another challenge in our present age right now, not as acute a challenge as the pandemic, but there's a challenge of a division between people, not only in the United States, but in many other Western countries, but perhaps maybe stronger in the United States, but it's definitely also there in other Western countries, a division between, it's hard to put a name to it, maybe traditionally it was called left wing and right wing, but they seem to be, the polarities become more pronounced, as if they can't meet anymore, they can't have a conversation anymore. And here's a question about, what advice do you have when someone finds themselves in conversations with family members, friends, or co-workers, and it is obvious there are strong differences of opinion on a particular topic, such as healthcare, guns, same-sex marriage, immigration policies, homelessness, and politics. Yes, that's... Well, what is the question? I forgot. Oh, what advice do you have when somebody finds themselves in conversations like that? There are strong differences. Now, the way the question is asked, I don't see a problem. I know what the problem is, but from just reading the question, it doesn't seem to be a problem, because the question says, what advice do you have when someone finds themselves in conversation with family members who have different opinions? Strong differences of opinion. Well, that wouldn't be a problem, would it? But there's more to it than that. It's not just strong differences of opinion, because that would be fine. You have a different opinion than I. Okay. But that's not how it is. What the questioner means, of course, is that people are identified with their opinion. What is an opinion? It's a thought form in your head. And you've probably adopted that, taken it from somewhere outside, from watching the internet, mainstream media, or some alternative source. You took in some opinion about any of these topics, and it becomes your opinion. What's an opinion? It's a thought form. Now, an unconscious person, lack of awareness being a deeper dimension of consciousness or higher dimension of consciousness, an unconscious person derives their sense of self from thought, plus emotions. Thoughts give them the sense. So if you derive your identity from a thought, then you need to be right. Your opinion, your opinion is regarded as the truth. You derive your sense of self from your opinion. Therefore, if anybody questions it or contradicts, this person is actually perceived as attacking you, not as somebody who has a different opinion. The unconscious perception is that this person is attacking you. And then you react as if you had been almost physically attacked. And this is how a discussion about these topics becomes very toxic. And it's not only when you're physically together, it operates in an exaggerated form when people only communicate online, and they communicate with people they haven't never even met. All they have of the person is a statement that this person posted, and they react as if this person were the devil and their mortal enemy. They know nothing about this person, and then they post something to insult that person and say, what a dreadful human being you are. and once you've posted this thing, your ego feels a little bit bigger. But then, of course, comes the reply of that person, and then you have to react to that. And then other people post things in reply to that, and then you find yourself in the middle of this. Some people are behind you, others are behind this other guy, and you can sit there for hours, and the ego loves it. Completely crazy. It's one of the insanities of our civilization, and there are many, is that kind of interaction, complete identification with conceptual ideas and mistaking who a person is, reducing another human being to a mental concept. Completely insane. And this is a new technology, has enabled the human ego to proliferate and grow in that way. And the people participating in that don't even know that it's insane. And that's making them more and more unconscious. And that could be, so the polarities become more pronounced in viewpoints and opinions. So you have basically, they can be kind of divided into left and right. One group of people probably voted for Trump, and the other one are probably suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. They're completely, there are other things that are part of that too. But where is that going? Well, how is it going to end? We don't know. Is there going to be some conflict, civil conflict? Is it to end peacefully? Depends how human consciousness will grow. It either grows through violent conflict or it grows in a more peaceful way. It's every age. In every age, the ego, the collective ego, manifests in one form, or well, in different forms, but they differ from time period to time period. In the 20th century, you had the collective ego manifesting in certain ways, for example, leading to the insanities of the First World War and the Second World War. First World War, everybody was eager to fight in every country. They would say, yeah, we're having another war, great. If you were there, you'd have to be very conscious to see the insanity of it all, because it's not easy. You need to be pretty awakened to recognize the insanity in your own cultural environment. Retrospectively, you can see it more easily. Oh, they were crazy. Or you can go back to the Middle Ages in many of the beliefs in what they did, and they burned people, and they put the most absurd ideas. Yes, there were some enlightened people too, but the general culture was pretty crazy, and you can see how can they. We can easy to see how crazy the human collective ego can be, but how crazy is it now? You could be part of it. Some of your opinions could be part of the insanity of the collective ego, and you wouldn't even know it. I'm not going to tell you what it might be, because it's for you to become aware enough to find out for yourself. But yes, this age has a growing craziness about it too. It's always what applies to the individual or it applies to the collective. It's easier to see the unconsciousness in others than it is to recognize the unconsciousness in yourself. Just as it is easier to see the collective unconsciousness in a certain culture in past ages or somewhere totally different on the planet, easier to see that than to see the craziness in your own culture where you are living. That is always, you need more awareness to see it. I do not attack verbally any crazy beliefs that I see around in the popular culture, because it's pointless. It would be like saying, when somebody comes to me, if I were a psychologist or psychiatrist, and somebody comes and says, I am, let's say, what's a common delusion? I am a reincarnation of Napoleon, but nobody believes me. I would not question and say, no, you're not. That's a delusion. I would just listen. There's no point in, because if I question the delusion, he'll just run away or attack me. So I just listen. Okay, that's interesting. And then perhaps by acting as the presence for his belief system, perhaps I can bring more presence to him too, just by being the presence there for him. And then perhaps he will have enough awareness to recognize his own delusion. And then I wouldn't have had, instead of me trying to convince him that he's deluded, I'm just there as the presence. And I do the same. I don't comment on contemporary culture very much, except in general terms, because it's not helpful. It's my job to help people awaken, and as they awaken, they become aware of their thought processes, and they will also become aware of certain thought processes that are completely deluded, that they have taken on from somewhere, probably the internet. So I still need to complete my answer to this question. What advice do you have when you find yourself in conversation with people and so on, completely different opinions? Well, what is your state of consciousness when you're engaged in these conversations with friends or family members and you disagree? That's the question to ask yourself. What is your state? Do you experience certain emotions? How do you interact with them when you have a discussion about this or that? Are you completely identified with your opinion? Do you become defensive or aggressive when you talk? Then you are part of the unconsciousness. And for the unconsciousness to operate, it needs at least two. It needs two sides. If you don't offer any opposition to their viewpoints, then the conversation would quickly come to an end. Is it possible to have a conversation with completely different viewpoints about these topics without involvement of the ego? Yes, it is possible. You do not have to give up your opinions. You can have your opinions on whatever these subjects you mentioned or others, but what you have to give up as you awaken, you do give up, is your identification with your opinions. In other words, deriving your sense of identity, your sense of who you are, from your mental positions. That's a delusion. And as long as you do that, you're engaged in a very unpleasant discussion where you're actually not defending the truth, you're defending your fictitious sense of self. And the more you defend your fictitious sense of self, the more unconscious you become, up to the point of physical violence sometimes. That's it. So it's up to you, it's not so much what others do, it's up to you to see, are you able to express your opinion, even almost forcefully, this is what I believe, but you are not in it. It's just that your opinion is there, it is. Because, so where are you? You are behind that, much deeper. You're the presence. It's nothing to do with thought. So you derive your identity from the deeper place, your essence identity, and then you can play with ideas and discuss them. Now the question is, can the other person also do that? Or are they completely identified? Well, maybe they're still completely identified with their opinions, in which case it would be a very strange experiment to have a discussion with one participant not identified with their opinion, the other participant completely identified with their opinion. It'd be interesting to see where that goes, or whether the conversation would quickly come to an end. There certainly would that person who is identified, would they perhaps suddenly run away because it's so weird to have somebody who has no ego involvement in the discussion. And that's for you to practice. Are you identified with your mental positions, or are you able to explain your mental positions without the self involved in them, your egoic self? interesting experiment. So next time be very conscious when you have these discussions, facing. Now, when you're discussing online, on the internet, it's a different matter. You're not really meeting a human being there. You're just meeting that. But do you dehumanize people by responding as if these people who have different opinions were the devil or your personal enemies? So you have to be very conscious. How do you interact with people, if you do, online? People that you've never even met. So be very, very much aware of your inner state while you don't post anything or give it some time. That's perhaps a good recommendation. Before you write something, but don't post it. Give it at least half an hour, 1 hour, or even better, sleep. Have a good night's sleep. In the morning, look at it again. And then see, do I want to post this or not? In many cases, you may want to say, okay, I don't need this. So the time interval perhaps is a helpful thing.